Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we are a part, and with deep gratitude to all the generations before us, all of our ancestors who have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome everyone to this session of Humanity Rising. Over the last 6 days, we've been contemplating our youth all over the world, which are in crisis. Crisis of the spirit, crisis of the emotions, of the psyche, of the mind, and it's universal. The accumulation of COVID for 2 years, war, geostrategic rivalries, code red for climate, species extinction, economic, political turbulence of all kinds around the world have affected our young people in very powerful ways. Virtually every indicator of mental, psychological, emotional, and even physical health is down. What we want to observe beginning our 4-day program on conscious leadership today is that it's also true for all of the adults. There's a global phenomenon of increased turbulence, escalating chaos, escalating uncertainty and volatility as we try to cope with how we navigate through a world that is changing so fast and adversely that we're unsure collectively really what's actually happening, let alone how we ensure that we can maintain a spirit of abundance and fortitude and vitality in the face of world events and runaway climate change. So the question of leadership, the question of how we understand, how we take accountability, how we initiate creativity in the midst of our crises. How do we seize the opportunities that are available in every crisis that we are confronted by? That's really what leadership is at this moment. And so we're going to be looking for the next 4 days on what constitutes conscious leadership given the state of our world. Before we dive in, let us pause as we always do and just take a moment to just center ourselves in our bodies. Our bodies are nature. Our emotions, our psyches, our minds are nature in a particular manifestation. And if you can, just close your eyes for just a minute and place your attention on your heart. While you listen to the music and attune yourself to the heart, think of our young people. Think of the duress that people you know are experiencing today. And ask yourself the question, how can I lead more consciously? Thank you, everyone. I'd like to now invite my two colleagues, Tom Eddington and George Caponelli, to open their videos and to join me. Tom, as you all know, because he's been a frequent convener here on Humanity Rising, is the founder and CEO of Endangered Global. He has rich and deep experience in leadership over several decades of building companies and consulting with leaders worldwide. Similarly, George Caponelli is the founder and CEO of Age Nation, and over the decades has exercised leadership among various organizational structures, consulted widely, and both of them are committed to what it takes in our time to be conscious, not only of the world, but of the kind of leadership that is required to deliver and fashion a better future. So Tom, George, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Jim, as always, and thanks for your courage and commitment in creating this platform that allows so many of us to talk about critical topics of our time. One of the questions you asked at the beginning of your opening is, how can I lead with greater consciousness? And the question that is rich in my mind this morning is, when I look around the world, how can I not lead with greater consciousness? And I think it's a question that Tom and I and a wonderful group of people this week will have an opportunity to consider. Tom, do you want to give us some overview from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, George, and thank you, Jim. It's always a delight to be here on Humanity Rising and engaging with the global audience. The sort of the roadmap of the week is to start today with the state of the world and what kind of leadership is needed. Tomorrow we'll dive into a specific kind of leadership, conscious leadership. We've got a wonderful panel today and tomorrow. On Thursday, we have a couple of CEOs who have been celebrated and recognized for their conscious leadership. And given that business is driving the agenda of the world, we'll have two exemplars of conscious leadership. And then on Friday, we're going to delve into the political realm. And the framework for the week is that nature needs to be and is very much a party at the table. Society very much has its own needs. Business has its feasibility needs for functioning. And then there's the political leadership. And what we've witnessed over the last century or so is that the needs of business and the needs of politics have outweighed the needs of society at large and Mother Nature. And ultimately, Mother Nature will always win. But in this time that we're facing now, where we've got a significant crisis at the societal level and at the natural systems level. And so what we're going to be exploring this week is each of those dimensions of business, the role that it plays in affecting the world that we're living in, and politics. So that's a bit of a summary and framework for the week. As I said, today we're going to start with a conversation around what is the state of the world, how did we get here, and what is the kind of leadership that we're seeing, and what's the kind of leadership that we need. So our panelists today include Punya Upadhyaya. Punya, if you'd like to join us. Punya is an extraordinary leader in the spiritual realm, in the business realm, and in the nonprofit world. He's brought his experience both from academia as a PhD from Case Western University, and has many years working with some of the top leaders in the world of the largest organizations, largest companies, in working with a major consultancy as a practice leader in leadership, as well as working on his own. And then joining us, and George, I'll let you introduce Terry and Owen.
Thank you. Owen and Terry, will you turn on your videos and your audios, please? Thank you very much. So Terry Tillman and I have walked on a lot of paths together for over 30 years. He's has a company called 227 Company, and under it he's worked with organizations and individuals around the globe, dealing largely with leadership, the different kind of leadership that we're talking about. How do we create new organizations? How do we lead from a different platform? He also, a number of years ago, wrote a terrific book called The Writings on the Wall that was about the taking down of the Berlin Wall and what that meant to Western society and to society in general. Owen, also a really good friend, is an entrepreneur, former editor and publisher of Psychology Today, American Health, Mother Earth News, Spy Magazine. I want to warn you, he's a troublemaker, so we ought to get that out in the open right at the beginning.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
And not that Terry is a slouch, and I'm sure, Punya, you're not very far behind, and perhaps you're ahead, in that regard. At the moment, Owen is taking on a new magazine project. He really has a gift for publications, and the new Santa Fe magazine that he's created is both an aesthetic as well as a content masterpiece, I would say, and maybe will prove to be a model for new magazines in cities around the country. So, none of us are immune to the reality and to the awareness of the plight that our world is in. Jim's talked about it, Bill, Tom's talked about it. We've all look around and see what the absence of leadership is causing. That's Charlie, who's joining Owen there in the background.
Sorry about that.
And Punya has some kittens that are going to be joining us, I think, off and on during the program. So we have a wide group of opinions on leadership. So where are we today in the world, gentlemen? And what is the state of leadership presently before we get to what the leadership or the state of leadership should be?
Yeah, Punya, if you don't mind, I'd like you to start, given that you're originally from India, the heart of the world, and how growing up in India and the spiritual culture that exists there that seems to be so absent in other parts of the world, and how that the absence of spirituality and in so many of our organizations and with so many of our leaders, to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Tom. I think to start with George's big question, like what is the state of leadership in the world today? I would say that it's fraught, and it's shot through with hope. That so many of the worlds that we look at, you can just run this litany of leaders of different kinds, are failing us. And failing us because of a lack of moral imagination, failing us because of a lack of vision, failing us because of a lack of courage. And yet, again and again, throughout the world, we find people who are willing to stand up, speak up, act, and create a better world. It's men and women. It's people with all kinds of different identifications. It's different ethnicities, different races, First Nations around the world. And all of them are doing this in different ways. One of the things that's actually very interesting in India is that when I was growing up, there was a very clear distinction, if you will, between the private and public worlds. And there was a sense in which your private world was mystical, religious, spiritual, deeply connected. And your technocratic world was intellectual, idealized, and so on. And what's happening now, though, over the last 30, 40 years, is that people have realized that split is basically deeply destructive to the psyche. It does have its bad effects. There's a bunch of neo-fascist groups that claim to represent Hinduism that are, have been gaining power. But at the same time, a large number of institutions of different kinds have been able to develop with this sense of spirit an engaged spirituality that's caring about the poorest of the poor, that's caring about feeding the hungry, that's caring about Mother Nature. And you've all heard of the Chipko Andolan, when the women hugged the trees and refused to let the outsiders come and cut the trees down to make sports goods. You've heard about the Narmada Bachao, the river campaigns that were again led by women and tribals to say, we're not going to let you destroy our mother. We're not going to let you destroy nature. And that sense of spirit-infused action has been a dramatic upsurge in India. And now it's gone into like formal organizations. So even CEOs of large organizations, and I've worked with a range of them, some of the largest groups in India. What's interesting is that while they have very, very aggressive financial targets, they're not namby-pambies, right? They have insane growth rates. The time you work in a Bombay or Delhi is like 20% greater than the time you work in a New York or Singapore. Just the amount of physical time you put into the office and work. But at the same time, they have a strong sense of spirit and a strong sense of service that we have to do this for the people. Sometimes it's also for the nation, sometimes it's for the communities, but there's a strong sense that we have to do this for the people. Wharton did a very good study with Harbir Singh and Pete Capelli, and they interviewed like some 60 CEOs, and they found that same pattern. That was one of the distinctive patterns they found about Indian CEOs. So I think that while the spiritual energy had gone down for a while in terms of the public space, over the last 30 years or so, it's had a resurgence, and people are really coming up and acting with a sense of God, with a sense of divinity, and acting in a way that's creating better worlds. It's incomplete, right? Like any human action, but it's becoming more and more common, and it's becoming easier to talk about. So I think that's one of the best parts of the world today, is that the sense of spiritually informed, of inspired leadership, conscious leadership is just expressing itself more and more as people are able to connect, deepen, and engage.
Terry, Owen, where are you on this?
A quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald's essay on in his Crack Up. The sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to be able to hold two opposing ideas in your head and still function. To me, that's also, it's a definition for intelligence and also irony. I've just completed, or in process of completing, an issue, and just on a local city level, and a conceit is, if you get it right in a city, you might be able to generalize in a larger frame. I've talked to people in the toughest of businesses. People are running the water here, trying to start dance for children and raising money. Women who are dealing with gun violence and doing something about it. And I guess I can report that thing in operation, meaning an overwhelming sense of mission. Committed mission, whether it be a woman who was a PhD and found herself in the business of raising money so she could buy guns here, or someone who routinely deals with water issues on an urban basis and all the planning. There is a sense of, I have to work harder, I have to do better, I'm not doing enough. I can't give up, but look at the world. What do I do? All I can do is what I know how to do, and I feel like at least that's my very local, very immediate, very recent experience in, say, the last 21 days. Do something at the same time. Do something concrete, but know that to some extent there are opposing things working against you, and still function somehow.
Terry?
The state of leadership in the world. Depends on which frame of the movie I look at, but on the external level, it's pathetic. What we consider nominal leaders in the world aren't leading at all. And so I say to myself, why would I look to the people who created the problem to solve the problem? So we got to look somewhere else. And where do we look? As you said, George, I've done some similar work, but I've been in 101 countries teaching leadership. And I call it inside out leadership. And it wasn't about how to lead other people. It's how do I lead my life at the highest degree of contribution and integrity and compassion and caring and kindness and, heart and all of that. And so I've been working with CEOs of Fortune 100 companies who get this, but they're not names you're hearing of. And I can point to evidence that their consciousness is, I wouldn't say changed. They always had it. They're just starting to value a different part of their awareness. And they're actually beginning, it's like turning the Queen Mary. I can point to some examples of companies. Like one of them is the largest paper company in the world. They're chopping down forests, trees. And I'm a pretty big environmentalist. I grew up in Oregon. But I can show you how they are now reclaiming lands in South America that have been pirated and planting trees and looking for ways to fertilize without chemicals and polluting the streams. They're actually doing this. I could go on and on, but so I see evidence. I was once introduced as a recovered businessman. 15 years out of college, I did type A workaholic and started and grew 6 companies, and I changed. So I know it's possible. Absolutely, I know it's possible. So to me, the hope is with the people. Now, on the other hand, you guys are probably Ray Dalio, Martin Armstrong, Generations, Fourth Turning. These are all historians and sociologists who've looked at the long cycle and predicted like generations. I think it was written in the early 90s, and they're predicting exactly what we're experiencing now. Ray Dalio, Martin Armstrong, same thing. So there's a predictable cycle, and we're in a phase of it. And it's the end of empires. It's when wars happen and depressions. And so this is not the first time it's happened. And my encouragement is the people always prevail. And somewhere emerging out of us comes somebody who then is identified as a leader, who's more conscious. And I haven't seen him yet, but he's out there, or they are out there someplace. Guys, Jim, you had so much to say. Children, the future of the children. I'm 79 and I have a 6-year-old son. I have a real stake in the future. And I tell you, I don't know right now the best way to raise the son or his friends, because it's different than when I was a child. But then I look back at the essential things, and is it different? Is it? You still got to develop the qualities, those invisible internal qualities of leadership: the caring, the compassion, the kindness, the contribution, the service, the understanding, the good things. It's still got to, so it's got to come from there, and not from the nominal leaders. That's how I see it. I have so much more to say, but I'm both optimistic and pessimistic at once. And which one do I want to look at?
Terry, picking up on one of the comments you made, an observation I is that many of our leaders get it. Many of them are switched on. When I talk to CEOs privately, they tell me they want to do the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing, but they can't go too far because their board will dismiss them. Many of our political leaders have said the same thing privately, and yet the behavior that we're witnessing is they continue to kick the can down the road, and we don't have any road left.
Yeah, no, so what I run into that all the time. It takes courage, and that comes from the French word coeur, heart. It takes heart. And detachment. It takes really big spiritual lessons, and very few of them have the courage to do it because like one CEO I'm working with. Who's a 33-degree Mason. That means he's got some level of spiritual awareness and consciousness. And we have great conversations, and he says, but Terry, I can't do that right now because of reasons like you just said. And I said, who says you can't? How much is enough? You got enough money, you have a foundation, your kids have finished school, You got 3 houses and a yacht. How much is enough? When are you, and he said, well, I've only got 5 more years, then I retire with my, golden parachute. I said, you may not make it 5 more years at the rate you're going. You're stressed, you're on heart medication. So it's like, even with all, to me, the incentive in the world to take that courageous step and step out there, they're afraid to do it. What's it take? On the other hand, there are a few who do. Blanking his name, Herb Keelagher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. I listened to him, this is like 15 years ago, speak one time, and the first thing he said is, the business of business isn't business. The business of business is people. And he went on to and expand on that. Well, the airline industry, which is an exceedingly competitive one, the major airlines have all been in bankruptcy, some of them more than once. And Southwest is the only one who hasn't, that continued to grow. I don't know where they are now, but the highest employee satisfaction, best safety record, on and on, exceeding and leading. So there are a few. And they demonstrate that this more conscious approach can work. Now, where are the rest of them? Well, they let greed and egos and power issues and all that interfere, but it doesn't take, we used to think if we could just get 10% of the population, that's enough. And I think we're closer. Some of us have gray hair in this conversation. We may not see it, but it's going to happen.
Terry, one of the things that I've found as I've spent time working in similar settings as you're describing, is that the two dynamics that I would see one was the fear that you're talking about, lack of heart. And the other part of it used to always be the sense that they couldn't see what was possible, right? There was a way in which they could see the blocks, the board, my team, etc. And it was interesting that in a sense, my experience, spirituality is very fluid, right? There's a sense of flow, there's a sense of depth and ebb and going with this. Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting exercise for me that I would have to structure it for them so that they could find things to grab onto, hold on to, and like turn it into a leadership program, turn it into a executive team alignment process, turn it into, programs like that made sense to them. Like, oh, this I can do, and trying to help them find those middle steps that would work. It didn't work always, of course, right? Mm-hmm. There were always people who didn't. But what I was always surprised by was that I could walk into a room with a CFO, with a CEO, with people, and ask people to do, what Jim asked us to do earlier on, heart coherence exercise, do a meditation, and most of them would do it immediately, right? In about 20 years, I've had one Dutch CEO who refused to do it, and he got pushed down by his team. And they said, well, you don't want to do it, you can sit, but we'll do it, mm-hmm. Right? That was sort of amazing. So there's this incredible hunger. And I think part of where we, as people who help these folks, need to work on is trying to figure out the mechanisms they can use to sort of get pulled in so that it makes sense to them and that they can do things in a way that helps them bridge the gap, of what they know they need to do, what they feel they need to do, but where they're trapped in the old modes of thinking and being. And many of them feel like they just don't have that pathway.
So, exactly. My forte is experiential education, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so if I could, and I got a good mind. I went to Stanford. I know the language, but I can do that. But it didn't really produce evidential results until I started working with them, learning by doing things, where they'd make their own discovery. I can give lots of examples before, but right. Meditation. I've been teaching meditation business for 40 years or more, but I didn't call it meditation. I called it a stress reduction technique. Because 30 years ago, if I said meditation, I don't think they would have let me in the door. Well, now they're all talking about it, mindfulness, which is a teeny bit of it. But, there's evidence that some shifts are happening. And I agree with you. The people are, I've worked in 101 countries. And in the heart, they're more alike than different. And if I can find that, and I can with a group, I worked in Israel a number of times, so I had Israelis and Palestinians in the same room, and the animosity is palpable. I mean, one time I walked in and I wanted to walk out. It was scary. But in a few days, they're hugging each other with tears in their eyes, some of them. I mean, literally, it can happen. how to do it with a whole planet and all the problems we got, I don't know. It's the Chinese. One Chinese guy told me, he said, if every one of us swept in front of our own door, soon the whole street would be clean. So that's all I know to do.
Oh, and
You know what?
go ahead.
I wanted to just say the getting people comfortable with failure is a great spur to imagination. If you say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can fail. Once you've failed and understand that is not the end, it often is the beginning. I found that in my own life, being comfortable with that, as well as things that work out. And to me, reducing that fear that it might not work out, and it's not clear what would happen. That's the great kind of paradigm, and in fact, for me, encouraging people to do something, anything that will make things better. Failure has always worked in the end as a precursor to imagination and success.
It's funny. I want to go back to the point that Tom, you and Terry were talking about. I tend to side with Terry on this. I think that there are a lot of people in the world that say, boy, I wish I could do that, or I know that's the best thing to do. They just lack cojones, or whatever you want to call them, to take the step that says, this is not a game I want to play anymore. I once was in the room with the president of a major multinational conglomerate, and I said to him, I'm here today to talk about the fact that I think you're really mistreating your people. You're abusing them. You're taking advantage of them. You're overworking them. You don't care that their divorce rates are going up and their health is declining and their families are suffering. I said, and I don't want to help you do that anymore. And he said to me, oh, you got to be kidding. I'm paying you so much money. What are you talking about? And I said, I'm done. I said, so I want you to know you're either going to say to me today, you're going to change that path, or I'm done. He said, oh, you're not going to leave. I said, well, watch my behind as I go out through that door.
Walk.
It takes courage, and it takes the willingness to fail. And a lot of these guys and women today, there aren't any women on our panel today, and I know a number of people in the chat are saying, where are the women? We just couldn't find anybody to be on this program today, but we do our best in all of our Humanity Rising programs to include the feminine perspective, because we understand and know how critical it is within each one of us and how critical it is in the world. But the other thing I want to say is, if any of you are out there sitting around with some smug kind of perspective saying, oh, those guys or those people that run companies, they're the ones that are responsible. If you own $1 worth of stock and you complain when the price of your stock goes down, that's the pressure those people at the top are talking about. It's we, the people, who financially control large quantities and amounts of the assets of companies through our stock purchases and our 501s and our 4Ks and our 9Ws or whatever the hell they happen to be. We're the ones that are helping to determine the poverty of the world, largely. And we're the ones that keep those people at the top scared, sometimes, of losing their jobs or losing their positions. This has to be a new kind of coming together. We, the people, and the people that run our companies have to form a new kind of collaboration, in my opinion. And we have to decide, what are our priorities? What are we willing to deal with, and what are we not willing to deal with? And so these are issues that I think impact the ability of people to be conscious. If we're not conscious as investors, and they're not conscious as managers and executives in companies, we're toast. And it's not any more complicated than that. So the real question is, what the hell are we going to do about it?
And picking up on that, George, and something that Owen mentioned last Thursday, our guest on the youth mental health crisis was Dr. Jane Goodall. Jane shared that the state of the world is our fault. We've created this mess. And I absolutely hear what you're saying, Owen, about learning from mistakes. Something I've observed myself and in leaders I've worked with is that whenever we fail, we spend a tremendous amount of time understanding why did we fail. And we'll analyze it, we'll look at it, we'll explore it. When we succeed, we expected to succeed, so we don't take the time to examine it. And the concern I have, and part of the conversation today and this week, is we're about to fail on a grand scale.
Yes.
And the world can't afford, humanity can't afford for us to fail. We've got a million species on the endangered species list. We've got over 300 gigatons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere. We are destroying our home, and we're destroying the lives of our children, the future of our children. And that's a level of failure we've never encountered before as a species. And we can't afford to fail, and yet we're pushing the accelerator to get to that scale of failure as fast as possible. And our backs as a species are against the wall, and we genuinely need some kind of creative thinking, some kind of alternative to help us get out of the systems that are driving that, supporting that accelerated failure. And we need a different kind of leadership. And the reality is, everyone on the planet is being asked to step up and be a leader, regardless of age, regardless of role, gender, et cetera. And so part of the conversation today is to set the stage for the week and to talk about what is that leadership? What are the qualities? What's needed? And how do we get out of the systems that are driving the behavior and what we're experiencing?
Oh, and I know you have a limited time frame today. Why don't you pick up from there? What are some of the things you think individually in your world and in our world that we can do to change the nature of leadership as we are currently experiencing?
Well, one of them is to understand, as we've said, that time is not our friend. That urgency is real, and that whatever might have worked in terms of long range plans and all that, we have to acknowledge that we are in a different situation than we've ever been. The earth is in a different situation. Our politics are different. The palpable impact of all the things that we haven't taken care of. And so, as you said, and I mean, it's courage, it's willingness to fail. It's to be able to throw out old paradigms and old things that we've all grown up with and say, we have to do something different. And in my little case, forget that magazines are having extinction events. If you rethink the actual basics of why people want to read a magazine, and why they haven't worked and why they might work if you change all the rules, that's worked. And I think it's worked because, frankly, I didn't look at what was out there in the last 15 years. I looked at what wasn't happening in this one place. And I hardly say that, I mean, that is an example in my own life. And I guess I say that we all have to be entrepreneurs. We have to think like entrepreneurs. We have to throw off the baggage of convention, because as I said, and we all know, this is the subject, time is not our friend anymore. Our failure has accrued, and failure things that have been long building are now getting concrete, and we can't keep doing what we're doing.
So what does it take to wake up enough people? I mean, the
Fear.
warning signs are building, and yet there's still a majority ignoring them.
You have to draw the lines. You actually have to not only observe the facts, but show what it means, and in a whatever form works, whatever gets people's attention, whatever gets them out of that in someone, which is habit, and habit and convention are enemies at this moment. And I don't care whether we run naked through the streets, whether we have to say, guys, whatever has worked in the past will not work. You have to change, and you will fail, but you cannot just go about business as usual. And in our own little lives, which ends up being more than just our lives, we have to do something palpable.
One of the things that I would suggest is that it's important actually to help people and leaders learn how to be happier. There's a ton of research showing that happiness leads to greater success.
Yes,
Not the
I
other way
agree.
around, right? Sonia has done some excellent work on that for about 20 years now. And yet there's a sense in which we keep insisting that we need to succeed so that therefore we can then be happy. And I think even that one shift, which is actually nourishing people, I think part of where I struggle sometimes is that we put a lot on people who are in different kinds of leadership roles and at all levels, right? I mean, I work with folks up there, and I've worked with Native American communities and, small religious nonprofits that have, barely any money and so on. But there's always the sense of pressure. And I think that when we add more pressure onto that pressure, it only makes life harder for them. And the ways in which we can nourish our leaders and our communities at the same time, I think it's one of the important things we need to think about, that we need to connect across this and build our shared happiness. And that gives us the moral and emotional energy to actually make a change. Because when I'm tired and depleted, then I can barely do whatever I know to do, right? When I'm done, then I'm sort of like, I'm just pushing my paper or, moving my mouse and just getting through whatever I have to do. And when I'm rich and replete and joyous, then I can actually make new things happen. And so how do we encourage this? And it's hard because, I look at a lot of the people who are quote unquote leaders, or at least have official positions, and I am appalled at what they do and how they do it. And yet, how do we help them replenish? How do we help them figure out better ways to do things?
I think you're really on to something there, Punya. It's simple, not easy, but it's simple. When I would have my initial interviews with a prospective client, a big part of my conversation was happy people are productive people. And no one disagrees with that, even though they may not understand it completely. And so a lot of what I've done, and I know George did it for quite a while, the way we did our work experientially, they have fun. I would do 2.5 days in retreat, and at the end of it, it's like the best holiday they've ever had.
Yeah.
Now, to sustain that, I quite honestly was never that successful. I mean, it might get it going for a few years, and then a new leader, they'd change leadership or something, and it would, but sustaining, it's another thing, but it's a ratchet. It never went all the way back, so it's a slow, the way I've seen it, has been a slow but gradual process. But I think you're really onto something. I watch my little boy, and it's taking me back to my childhood. All he wants to do is play. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, but you got to learn a few things. And I'm thinking, well, you could learn to play, and that might be the most valuable thing you do in your life.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, if you don't want to be doing math and you'd rather go out and play baseball, okay, let's go have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if adults relearn that?
Yeah.
I think you're really onto something.
Yeah, picking up on this conversation, the two guests we have on Thursday, Bob Chapman, CEO of Barry Weinmiller. Bob introduced in the organization culture a number of years ago that as leaders, you have a responsibility for the people within your span of care, not span of control, but care.
Mm-hmm.
And he has instilled in each of his leaders that they need to view everyone in their span of care as someone's precious child. Jason Lippert, who will also be joining us, and both of these are CEOs of multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies. Jason, the metrics he uses are things like smoking cessation, weight loss, divorce rate. These are the metrics that he's paying attention to in running a multi-billion-dollar company, because he knows, and Bob knows as well, that paying attention to the people is the most critical thing that he can do, because whatever their work experience is, they take it at home to their families, they take it home to their communities that they live in. And they both have prioritized the things that really matter, because if their people are happy, then they have the financial success that Wall Street and the shareholders are looking for.
You know, I'm sorry to have to leave this conversation, but I mean, all the research that I did at Psychology Today, the desire to be happy is universal. The ability to be happy is much more complicated. But I feel like making the connection between personal health and the health of all the world, of the entities we're trying to change, cannot be underestimated. And as you guys, as we're discussing it, we intuitively distrust people that are not artists or not happy in their own biography. And I guess I think that, again, it's almost a contradictory but concept, a paradox. You have an unhealthy situation, yet in order to change it, you have to find some solace, some happiness, some attainment in your life, because you're not going to be an effective agent of change if you do not exhibit that, manifest that. And anyway, I'm struck with that conversation, that point that we're talking about. Anyway, my apologies for having to leave. And thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, I think you said something that caught my attention, and I paraphrase, but everybody's somebody's child, or however you said that.
Mhm.
That is a shift in perspective that could create a huge change, because we treat children differently. If we started seeing the adults, the child and the adult, or the essence that was the child, not childish, we would behave differently toward each other, because you don't hurt children. You want to help them. You want to support them. You want to learn together. You play. It's a whole different. I once had a major part in a startup called HAPCO, Happiness Company, and but it was based on the leading edge positive psychology work. It's what I never labeled what I was doing as positive psychology. That was a name that came on later, but it's essentially that, and a lot of interesting, pretty recent studies showing the effect of positive, a positive focus. One of the most practical things I teach, the way that or I've learned or learning, and the way I say it is, where you look is where you go. But what I'm creating or manifesting as a result of my focus, Bruce Lipton calls it perception. It's, to me, it's focused through my belief system. What I'm focusing on, it ends up being what I call reality. And so I need, if I want a positive result, I need to shift my focus. Now, the quantum physicists are now discovering this. Nothing new, but we've been teaching it metaphysically as long as I've been at this. And so so we have ways of demonstrating this to people, but how to scale it, how to get it to go viral, I don't think we figured that out yet.
I think we're also, you were talking, Terry, you mentioned that you would be working with a company, and I know Tom and Punya, you have all had the same experience. You've built momentum. You're beginning to produce a change in the culture. A CEO leaves and a new gun comes in. Within months, sometimes a year or two of work has been washed away. And there are remnants that are like pods or seeds that are planted in the culture. I left the business largely for that reason. I was tired of building something up to watch some fool come in and tear it down. And what I recognize is that what none of us are talking about is that it is the system itself that is destructive. It is this fundamental thing called capitalism as we practice it that took us off the path of the wisdom traditions, that caused us to change priorities that had helped Tom, the environment and the other species and humanity actually grow and prosper for the greater portion of this 250,000 years Homo sapiens have been identified. So the question is, when are we going to get smart and recognize that the system itself is destroying us? And it's that system that we have to work on simultaneous to our own, I believe anyway, to our own individual level of consciousness and to the amount of play or happiness or joy. All of those things are essential, but we can bring all the joy we want to bring into a system that's corrupt and destructive, and we're not going to produce the result ultimately we want. So what do we do about that? How do we finally get humanity to recognize that Bucky was right? Sufficiency is a key. The consumption and materialism are never going to get us there. That individual greed and the disparity in economic status, it's all bullshit. And unless we call it a spade, as they say, we're not going to get to the place we want. And all of the other things we're talking about are still critical.
You know, that's the how to, George. Good question. My first wife was an alcoholic, and it was hell. And so I got involved with Al-Anon and, you know, spouses of alcoholics and such. And they always said they got to go to the bottom before they start back up. But this particular woman never got to the bottom. You know, at what point do you and I have had conversations. My thing was, what if there was a meteor coming and we knew at time certain it was going to hit the earth? You can, I would say you can be guaranteed the humans on the planet are going to align in a solution to that problem, because otherwise they're gone. Well, Tom, you have some of the information you said. I think you ought to develop a list of all these issues. 1,000 species on the almost extinct. That's. I grew up in Oregon. The old growth forests I camped in are almost gone. This is wake up stuff. It's so what if we accumulated, like, put it in people's face, like you were saying, George, spade a spade. Because I think most of them, they're not so stupid. If they have better information, they make better decisions. So can we put better information in front of them in a way that wakes them up? I don't know.
I think, Gary, I would suggest that information has proven to be inefficient, because we have a surfeit of knowledge and a terrible lack of insight and a terrible lack of action. I mean, truthfully, in our world today, we know all the things you're saying. And my curiosity is that if you look at George's question, maybe the discussion needs to be on how do we think about new kinds of incentives, right? Or new kinds of ways to design returns. I think that was, for example, for a lot of people, that was the interest or the joy of looking at Web 3.0, cryptocurrency, DAOs, and so on, was that there was a hope, there was a way to actually create a decentralized system that wasn't so driven by top-down greed. Of course, it was run by venture capitalists and so on. So it was another example of looking for high greed, high returns. So it's sort of, But I'm curious, because information by itself seems to have failed us.
Well, it depends on which information. If the information is a meteor is going to arrive in 3 months.
No, but we've seen the IPCC reports now for 20 years. They won the Nobel Prize. We've had the information, what Tom's talking about. We've got really good groups doing that. And it's something I found interesting is though I almost never heard the word information till I came to the US. Although I ran like a technology business and an information business in India before I came to do my PhD, but it was really interesting. The way Americans think about information is really interesting to me. It's seen like some sort of a magic bullet, but as we've seen with the disinformation, the propaganda, the outright lies that go on in this society, that we somehow miss it. And so I'm curious, what are some other levers we could try to pull? Because we've told people, right? I mean, you've had from Rachel Carson on down, we know we're killing ourselves. We know we are destroying the planet for our children. We know that we're making it so that the people who come, the next generation after us, is probably going to have a lower standard of living, most of them, than we do, right? We know we've done this, but that's not helping. People know it and they ignore it and they go forward and do it. The people in politics, in bureaucracies, in hospitals, in businesses, they're all smart people. They know this stuff.
So we're not going to solve it mentally, intellectually.
Right. So
No,
what
I
are some
agree
other
with
options?
you. Yeah, I agree with you. George was the first person who ever said to me, "We're in the information age." That was back in the early '80s, and I remember thinking, "What are you talking? What is that?" Well, maybe we're at the end of that now. It hasn't. I agree with you. You're right. So what is it? To me, it's experience. I wish if I were making the rules, I would teach everybody, all the kids, karma. Because if I believe if humans really understood that, they'd make better choices.
Well, Terry, picking up on your comment about if there were a meteor coming to Earth, back in around 2010, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a former US astronaut. He spent the longest period of time on the International Space Station. And in his downtime while out on the International Space Station, he was looking at the area around the Earth and realizing that the Earth was under threat from meteors, asteroids, and we had no idea of what that potential threat was. And when he returned to Earth, he left NASA and he set off on a mission to map the potential threats to Earth. And he put together a budget, put together a business plan, put together a very well thought through plan for mapping what were the potential threats to Earth. He went to his former employer, NASA, met with the leadership of NASA and said, the Earth is under threat. We don't even know what that potential threat is. Here's a plan for mapping the potential threats to planet Earth. The leadership of NASA said, we're focused on deep space. We have our mission that's telling us to focus on other things. Maybe you should go talk to the Department of Defense. So he met with the Pentagon leadership, presented the plan, and the Department of Defense said that's not within our remit. Our responsibility is for dealing with threats here on planet Earth. So he went to meet with members of Congress, and I mean we're talking about a budget of $550 million to map and then to deter the threats to the Earth. And all the congressional representatives he met with said, that's terrific. You should find the money and go do it. And I saw him several years later, and he was giving a talk and had made significant progress through private funding, but was still unable to, whether it was through the United Nations, through our elected officials, through leadership at NASA, the Pentagon, Department of Defense, et cetera, had been unable to get our governmental leaders and inside the US and outside the US to fund what was a critical threat or potential critical threat to the Earth and to humanity. So speaking to George's comment about the systems, that's what we're up against. And this is the information is there. So it wasn't an information problem. It was a systems problem. It was a leadership problem. And he's still been diligently 14 years later trying to address this existential threat to humanity.
I would also say it's a vision problem. You know, I mean it in the sense that I don't think that there are enough of us that are painting the visions of possibility and giving it specificity, giving it process, so that someone can move from a current state that is unacceptable to them. If you think about advertising, what is advertising? It's a mechanism whereby people are made to feel uncomfortable about the size of their home or the costumes that they're wearing or the car that they're driving. And then they're given the new image. The beautiful clothing, the wonderful home, the slicker, faster, more comfortable car. And the next thing you know, the checkbook comes out or the credit card comes out and they're moving in that direction. Well, what if we started painting pictures of life that wasn't this madness that we're living in? What if we were painting pictures that gave people a tangible understanding of what a day in the life of consciousness would be? What would happen if we literally created films and books and television programs that got people out of this economic servitude? I mean, think of the insanity of the lives that most of us lead, right? We're buried in debt. We're working continuously to pay off debt that only increases. That's life. I think part of the key, part of the opportunity that we have, every single human being, through creativity, through writing, through art, through conceptualization, we could be painted. Today in this hemisphere, it's called the strawberry moon. And it's a time of extraordinary possibility and hope. But the key is that we have to project that ideal scene that we want with tenacity and with passion and with grace and with courage and actually believe in it. So maybe the way we change the system is to have a kind of group, massive reorientation and rethinking, but we need specificity. What would a day be like in the life of an ordinary human being on this planet if they were not burdened by this consumption, materialism crap that doesn't lead us anywhere except over the cliff? And meanwhile, the people that are leading us, we have no control over. Look at our Congress. They're so out of control, and yet they're our employees. We pay their salaries. We pay their retirement. They make their own rules. They decide how much to work. They make up their own salaries, and they name their retirement benefits. No wonder they don't pay any attention to us. So I think there are wonderful ways we could be changing things, and I don't think we're paying enough attention to those things.
Well, how do you, I look at my own, how did I re-educate myself? I mean, I grew up, my grandfather and father were business guys, and I bought into this more is better and all that. How did I learn that wasn't it? How did you learn it? I remember the first time I worked in France, I was doing a 5-day seminar. And the first day I ran a little bit over, and so it was lunchtime, and I turned everybody out to go to lunch at like 1:30 or something instead of 12:30, and there were no restaurants open. And I'm thinking, what? No restaurants open? Well, why? Because they took time off in the afternoon to enjoy themselves and relax and do something, more pleasant for them. And then I'm thinking of the US, where the stores stay open until midnight on Christmas Eve so they can sell more. And that was my first introduction. You know what? There's a different way to live. It's like, it doesn't have to be this more and more, bigger, faster, better. And then, and I achieved that success and at a young enough age that I said, that's it. I mean, there's no there. You mean I got there and this is it? Now, why don't some of the others who accumulate all this more, why don't they come to that realization? I don't know. Fear? Don't have the courage? I don't know. But I know some of us did, and it's possible.
One of the
Jim, I
joys-
think Jim, if I could just for a minute, Punya. Jim, come on in. We could use your additional voice at the moment to add some perspectives. Punya, I didn't mean to intrude. Please continue.
Oh, no, I was just saying, welcome back, Jim. I was just saying that it is interesting. One of the joys in my life is that I get to live in Taos, New Mexico, which has many, many special features, starting with an incredible sacred land and sacred space. And we have a lot of people here who live alternate lifestyles. I mean, part of what I see is a lot of young people over the last 15, 20 years, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of young people who stream through here looking for different ways to live and different ways to be. And part of what I'm struck by is the increasing amount of infrastructure for young people who want to choose different ways to live, whether it's community gardening, whether it is different kinds of nonprofits, whether it's different kinds of community structures. And my hope is that this efflorescence of new institutions and building out that vision in daily pragmatic life are things that we can do. Of course, all of these things have, their own growing pains, all kinds of things, whether it is sexism, drugs, difficulties of different kinds, mental health issues, and so on. But the fact is that is true everywhere, right? We tend to pick on the people who are trying to do alternatives and say, hey, look, this is wrong with you. But I think the more we can celebrate those things and we find these ways of connecting and growing and really expanding our set of possibilities, our set of actions, I think the more exciting it can be. And frankly, even if you look now, there's just the number of businesses, the number of organizations that are trying to do things in different ways is constantly growing. And I think encouraging that, I think it could be great fun. Right? I think it could be
George,
like awesome.
I'm going to have to go. I got another call at 9:30. I've got to prepare for. I'm sorry. I thought this was an hour, but to be continued.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you all.
See you later, Terry.
Jim.
Very, very compelling conversation. And I think what I've been struck by it is even your last remarks, Punya, we're all groping. We're all aware of the gathering darkness, and we're unsure exactly what should be done other than to sort of just keep doing what we're doing, knowing in the back of our minds that that's Einstein's definition of insanity. When you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So I come into this conversation in a spirit of deep inquiry and uncertainty, both in terms of my leadership in the company that I founded, in terms of my own sense of how I and my family are navigating through escalating turbulence. And I think I would bring in something that hasn't really been accentuated, but feels to me to be far more important than we're all taking in right now. And that is the war in Ukraine and the deconstruction of the global order. And I want to bring this in, and Punya, you know India, and I'd love to have your comment, but normally leadership is associated with institutions. You're the leader of a company, or you're a leader of a country, or you're a leader of a big NGO. But what we're experiencing right now is I would say, a movement of the tectonic plates, so that as climate change escalates externally, what humanity is choosing to do around Ukraine is deconstruct an already fragile global infrastructure that is barely working as it is, and now is being forced into a duress that the consequences of which I think we're already beginning to feel with the economic disruptions of food supply lines and so forth. So it's like humanity, to your point at the beginning, Tom, is imploding while it's exploding simultaneously. And it's within that context, it feels to me, that we've got to think through in a completely new way what leadership even means. And that's why, just to bring you up to speed, Punya, and then I'd love your comment. Last week, we were talking about youth. And what began to occur to me is that if we want to keep away from Einstein's axiom about insanity of just doing the same things over and over, maybe we need to do something completely radical as the only option left. And that is to turn leadership over to our young people. And what came to me is, if you think of the two iconic movies, of our time, Star Wars with Luke Skywalker, Dune that came out last year with Paul Atreides, they're both 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And if you think of Lord of the Rings, when the world was falling, it was little Frodo and the hobbits that even Gandalf, the great wizard, acquiesced to, because they knew intuitively that the normal mechanisms of leadership were no longer capable of leading the forces of light, shall we say, to redeem the world. So I've been thinking more and more of a global campaign to turn leadership over to the young people by 2030. And we're actually thinking about that for ubiquity. Because we need to bring a new consciousness in that's not controlled by the old consciousness. And the young people, if you think about it, are the only group out there that hasn't succumbed to the old patterns of behavior simply because they're too young. And you think of David against Goliath. There's all kinds of examples through history. Napoleon, Alexander, all over, that when a critical moment happened, that it was an exceptionally young person that came in, and the adults were wise enough to make way. So does that strike you as have even a modicum of redemptive value, given the state of our world, Punya? Or is
I love the idea. And the fact is, we are seeing some amazing young people, right? Whether it was David Hogg and Eliza, who came out after the school shootings,
Greta,
Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan, Greta Thunberg. So I think the part of it is that we have this. I would suggest, Jim, that I love the idea of pushing more institutional responsibility younger, hopefully with guardrails and support, because we've done that in a few settings. And, frankly, large complex institutions take a different kind of skill and quality of thinking than most young people have. It's one thing to go on a quest. It's a different thing to run the quest, right? Which is why Gandalf runs the quest, if you will, while Frodo and Sam go into the mountain. And so I think the solution is like sort of an all of the above, right? Because if you think of the two most successful social movements, whether India's independence by Mohandas Gandhi or South Africa's independence through Nelson Mandela, these were, old guys, right? And old guys who were elite old guys in their society. They weren't Anglos, but they were elite in their societies. So old elite men have a role to play. I'm just being honest here. I mean, there is a role for all of us. But I love the idea of giving much greater institutional space to young people. So one of the nonprofits that I work with has always had youth seats on our board so that they get a chance to do it. And we structured it so that we had at least 2 young people at a time on the board so that they could, bring a perspective that most of us old folks didn't have. And sometimes it was incredible, and sometimes it was difficult because young people don't have the patience for, board deliberations and policy changes and things like that, which are important. So I think in a sense, it's all of the above, but they have so much to give. And I think that we have disempowered them with the lack of play, with the lack of support, with the lack of care, with the lack of just valuing them for being who they are, for being that I think more we can do to give them that space and that platform, the more amazing it'll be for all of us.
Punya, I'm sorry, Jim, but I really agree very strongly with you. And that is one of the other things that historical studies have shown is that in societies where elders do step aside, but they continue to have a very active role as counsels of wise individuals that aren't necessarily in the direct line of authority, but are consulted, and their input mitigates. And because let's face it, part of the shit we're in today, pardon my French, is due to the enthusiasm youth have for technology that isn't connected to the consequence of the wisdom traditions. So I think it has to be a balance, but more youth engaged, more elders consulting, a true blend of the best that we have to offer instead of something entirely different. I have a cat that is having a little trouble for a second. I'll be right back with you.
I'm just picking up on something you shared earlier, and it's part of the focus of this week is consciousness. And so from the work I do, and when I look at, we've got systems that have outlived their usefulness. We've got a leadership style that is no longer appropriate. For me, when I get to the quote unquote heart of the matter, it's around human consciousness. And if I look at a framework like spiral dynamics, for example, most of the people on the planet are in some stage of tier 1. And we need to, given the complexity of the problems we're facing, the consciousness that created the complexity of those problems, we don't have the consciousness to solve the complexity. And as a species, we need leaders to move to, regardless of gender, regardless of age, race, where they are in the world, we need people who are functioning at a tier 2 level. And we see that in many of our indigenous peoples. And so there needs to be a receptivity to bringing that tier 2 consciousness more broadly into solving some of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to say I'm watching and have been, I said earlier that we regret that there aren't feminine voices that are part of this dialogue. And I've noticed in the chat that this issue comes up again and again. And I agree that women need to be a vital and integral part in the decision-making of our time. I have no doubt about that. There is great progress that can be made. But I reject the idea that women are the only solution. They're a necessary and essential part of how we move forward. But I have encountered in the modern world a significant number of women who have bought into the same negative, limited perspectives that men have been operating in for some time. So let's remember, youth, men, women, as Tom said, people of all genders, people of all ethnicities, people of all belief systems. We need a new way of coming together to share the strengths that each one of us have, to put into a new mixture, to arrive at a new story. But there are no panaceas, and there are no, there's a panacea for you. the point, you know. But there are no silver bullets. There's not going to be any Deus ex machina that descends with one primary female or male leader on a white horse that's going to lead us home. Kids, whether we recognize it or not, the ball is in our court.
You know, and I think in my mind too, I really think that's an important point, George. And I was thinking of your point too, Tom, about consciousness. And again, Einstein's the consciousness that produced a problem can't solve it. And if I would be thinking sort of at the level of consciousness, it feels that nature and indigenous consciousness is probably the most important North Star or orientation matrix that we could have right now. And that's one reason why I have trees in my background, so that people are seeing nature on Humanity Rising. I refer to nature a lot so that we bear in mind the most fundamental issue is that we're in these predicaments largely because we've cut ourselves off from nature. And it's our capacity to find our way back home under the guidance of indigenous wisdom that is really something that's available to everybody, everywhere, whatever gender and whatever age, that we need to be embracing with more passion, almost a desperation, given the urgency of the hour.
You know, I've been very blessed that in this country, part of why I was able to stay here is because I got invited to Lakota ceremonies and have spent 25 years doing ceremony with them in South Dakota, Navajo, and,
Beautiful.
you know, live out here in Taos and Pueblo and so on. And part of what I'm aware of is, again, the same thing, right? It's like there's this brilliance, this beauty, this intensity that is life-giving and life-changing in very deep ways. And at the same time, these are societies that need a lot of help and a lot of partnering from all of us. The pain that they live with, the pain of ongoing colonization, the pain of ongoing violence against Indigenous women, the ways in which they are exploited and brutalized is something that, you know, we need to include in our discussion. It's
Totally.
You know, there is the gift they give us, and then there is the responsibility we have to be good partners and to play together and to celebrate and pray together. I mean, the friends and family I've made doing these things over the last 25, 30 years have been amazing. And they have deeply changed my heart. And hopefully we've done work with them to help make life better. So I think it's an important thing to sort of have that wholeness again of the real needs they have and the real ways in which our societies have trampled upon their reality and their ability to live well.
Totally.
So,
good. Well, thank you. As we close this session, Tom, why don't you give us a summary? George, anything you want to say in summary? And then, Tom, if you could tee up the session for tomorrow.
Sure. So we've got an extraordinary panel tomorrow. We've got Dean Anderson will be joining us. He's been doing work in the conscious leadership realm, and we'll be able to talk in great detail about what I was describing from the different tiers of consciousness. He's been working with police forces around the country to bring more consciousness into the police forces and the activities. He's been working in corporate America. So very practical, hands-on experience. We've got a couple of wonderful academics, Cuff Ferguson and Joyce Hope Scott, who will be joining us, along with Celeste Kruger, who's been doing a lot of work in nonprofits and leaders. So we'll have some real practical conversations around conscious leadership in action and what each of these folks are doing with the organizations that they work with and in the academic settings.
And I just want to thank Terry and Owen, who left earlier, and Punya, it was a pleasure meeting you and having an opportunity to begin this conversation. And I just I just close today with a statement that I quote a lot from Bucky Fuller, who says that we're born to be the architects of the future and not its victims. And I think if each one of us were to use that as our guiding principle as we move through every day, we would find that there are some things we could do to be more the architects of the future than its victims.
Okay.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Punya. I've been inspired by all your cats during the course of the program, and they have great wisdom too, as you no doubt know. So that brings us to a close of our first of 4 days on conscious leadership, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. And we'll see you then again tomorrow, same time, same station, for a further discussion of what it means to be conscious and lead in our world today. Bye for now.